As a child, I used to believe that if I stayed quiet long enough, maybe someone would notice me. I thought silence was a test that one day my parents would look at me and say, "She's so well behaved. She deserves love." But silence didn't earn me affection. It erased me. My earliest memory is standing in the corner of the living room while my relatives celebrated my cousin's birth. Blue balloons, laughter, loud prayers of gratitude. I remember asking my mother why nobody celebrated my birthday like that. She didn't answer. She just adjusted my dress and told me to stand properly. That was the first time I felt it. The weight of being a girl in a family that worshipped suns. Growing up, I learned how love was distributed in our house. It wasn't unconditional. It was measured, calculated, given to those who fit expectations. My brother didn't have to earn it. It followed him like a shadow. I had to prove myself just to exist, and even then, it wasn't enough. When my brother failed an exam, my parents blamed the teachers. When I scored the highest marks in my class, they said, "It's normal for girls to be good at memorizing. No praise, no pride. Just dismissal." At dinner, my opinions were interruptions. If I spoke too much, I was disrespectful. If I stayed quiet, I was well-mannered. Either way, I was never heard. My father made decisions about my future as if I weren't sitting right there. Marriage plans, restrictions, limits placed on my dreams before I even understood what dreaming meant. I remember one night, hiding under my blanket, listening to my parents talk about expenses. My father said, "Why spend so much on her education? She'll leave this house anyway." That sentence cut deeper than any insult. It reduced my entire existence to a temporary burden. From that day on, I stopped asking for things. I stopped asking for toys. I stopped asking for new clothes. I stopped asking for attention. But what I didn't stop doing was watching. I watched how money controlled respect. I watched how people listened only when someone had power. I watched how my brother's phone made him important, how relatives called him directly, how his opinions suddenly mattered because he was connected. And I realized something terrifying and motivating at the same time. In this family, worth was proven, not given. So I made myself a promise I never said out loud. Not to my parents, not to my friends, not even to myself in words. One day, they would listen when I spoke. One day, they would say my name with respect. One day, they would realize the mistake they made when they decided I didn't matter. And when that day came, I wouldn't beg for their approval. I would already have everything they denied me. That was the beginning not of my success, but of my revenge. By the time I turned 12, I had mastered the skill of disappearing while standing in plain sight. It wasn't something I chose. It was something I adapted to. In my house, being visible meant being criticized, corrected, or compared. Being invisible was safer. Every morning followed the same routine. My brother ate breakfast first. His uniform was neatly pressed. His school bag checked twice. If he forgot a book, my mother would run after him. I ate whatever was left, usually standing, because the table was too crowded. If I forgot something, I was told to be more responsible. Responsibility, I learned, was another word for neglect. At family events, I was assigned duties instead of seats. Serve tea, clear plates, watch the younger children. I moved from room to room like a shadow while conversations flowed around me. People spoke about careers, businesses, and investments, topics I wasn't allowed to have opinions on. When I tried to join once, an uncle laughed and said, "Why are you so serious? Go help your mother." I didn't argue. Arguing never worked. At school, things were different. Teachers asked questions and waited for answers. When I raised my hand, they listened. That contrast confused me at first. How could strangers value my thoughts more than my own family? Slowly, I realized the truth wasn't about me, it was about them. At home, my success was inconvenient. It didn't fit the story they had written for me. I started spending more time in libraries and computer labs. Not because I was allowed to, but because no one bothered to ask where I was. Their lack of interest became my freedom. I discovered the internet, forums, and videos about technology and startups. Words like innovation, coding, and entrepreneurship lit something inside me. One afternoon, I borrowed my cousin's old phone to check emails. My brother noticed and immediately complained. That evening, my father took the phone from my hands and said, "Girls don't need these distractions. the phone disappeared, but the curiosity didn't. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the sentence in my head. Girls don't need. From then on, I stopped sharing my interests. I studied secretly. I practiced on broken devices. I memorized technical terms like they were spells that could unlock another life. I didn't dream loudly anymore. I dreamed strategically. I learned to smile when dismissed and nod when ignored. I learned to store my anger somewhere deep, where it couldn't be used against me. People underestimate silence, but silence can sharpen a person. While my family saw a quiet, obedient girl, something else was growing beneath that surface: determination, discipline, and a hunger to prove that invisibility was temporary. They thought ignoring me would make me small. They didn't realize it was making me strong. And without knowing it, they were giving me the one thing I needed most to succeed. Time to build myself in secret. When I turned 14, something inside me refused to stay silent anymore. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit the space my family allowed me. But the more I learned, the bigger my thoughts became. Keeping them locked inside felt like suffocating. I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, if I spoke carefully, they would listen. It happened one evening at dinner. My father was talking about my brother's future, proudly explaining how he would study business and eventually take over responsibilities. Everyone nodded. I sat there, poking at my food, my heart beating fast. Then, without planning it, the words slipped out. "I want to study technology," I said softly. The room went quiet for a second. Then laughter filled the air. Not cruel laughter, worse. Amused laughter, the kind that makes you feel foolish for even trying. My father looked at me as if I had said something absurd. "Technology?" he repeated. "Why would you need that?" I explained carefully how phones and systems fascinated me, how the world was changing, how skills mattered more than gender. I spoke slowly, choosing words that wouldn't offend. When I finished, I felt exposed, like I had handed them my heart. My brother smirked. "She watches too many videos." My mother avoided my eyes. My father leaned back and said the sentence that would follow me for years. "Dreams are good, but girls like you should stay realistic. Girls like you. Not my daughter. Not smart. Just girls like you, a category already defined, limited, and dismissed." He continued, explaining how education was expensive, how technology was stressful, how my real responsibility would come later. Marriage, family, sacrifice. As he spoke, I felt something strange happen. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I felt clear. I nodded and apologized for speaking out of turn. I told them I understood. They seemed relieved, as if a problem had resolved itself. The topic changed, and my moment disappeared like it had never existed. That night, I took out an old notebook and wrote everything I wasn't allowed to say. I wrote about networks, devices, companies, and independence. I wrote about money as freedom and knowledge as power. I wrote until my hand hurt. For the first time, I understood something important. If I waited for permission, I would never move. From that day on, my dreams became private. I didn't share goals. I built them quietly. I studied harder, not to impress my family, but to escape their expectations. Every insult became fuel. Every dismissal became proof that I was on my own. They thought discouraging me would break me. What it actually did was remove my fear of disappointing them, because I already had. And when you have nothing left to lose, ambition becomes dangerous. I didn't need their belief anymore. I would become my own evidence. After that dinner, something shifted in me. I stopped expecting encouragement from my family and started treating knowledge like a secret weapon. If they wouldn't open doors for me, I would learn how to build my own. School became the only place where I felt real. Within those walls, I wasn't a burden or a future bride. I was a student, a mind, a person with potential. I clung to that identity with everything I had. I arrived early and stayed late. I borrowed books instead of buying them, photocopied notes instead of asking for money, and memorized entire chapters so I wouldn't need resources at home. When teachers praised me, I learned not to talk about it. Praise made my family uncomfortable. It reminded them that I was becoming something they couldn't control. I discovered the computer lab during lunch breaks. Old machines, slow internet, but to me, it felt like stepping into another world. I taught myself the basics: how systems worked, how software connected hardware, how information traveled. Every new concept felt like breathing fresh air after years underwater. At home, none of this existed. I still washed dishes, folded laundry, and stayed quiet. My brother got new books and private tutoring. I got lectures about humility. But while they saw obedience, they didn't see preparation. I began entering academic competitions without telling anyone. When I won a regional science contest, the school called my parents. My father came to collect the certificate, thanked the teacher politely, and never mentioned it again. The certificate stayed in my drawer unseen, like proof of a life I lived alone. There were days I felt exhausted physically and emotionally. I watched classmates get support, guidance, and encouragement. I wondered what it would feel like to have someone say, "We believe in you," sometimes. That longing hurt more than the insults. But then I reminded myself why I was doing this. Education wasn't just about grades anymore. It was about distance from limitations, from expectations, from a future decided by others. Every lesson I learned was a step away from the version of myself they wanted me to be. One evening, while helping my brother with his homework, I solved a complex problem faster than he could. He stared at me in surprise. For a brief moment, I felt seen. Then he laughed and said, "You're wasting your brain here." He didn't mean it cruelly, but he was right. That night, I made a quiet decision. I would leave this environment one day not through rebellion, but through achievement. I would earn opportunities they couldn't deny, even if they never celebrated them. They believed education would make me obedient. They didn't realize it was teaching me freedom. And once you taste freedom, even in small doses, you start planning for more. This wasn't just studying anymore. This was my exit strategy. By the time my final school results came out, I already knew what they would say before they said it. I stood near the doorway while my father read the report, his face unreadable. Top grades, distinctions, a recommendation letter attached. Any other family would have celebrated. Mine treated it like an inconvenience. "You did well," he said finally, folding the paper. "Now we need to think realistically." Realistically, that word again. A week later, I received an acceptance letter from a technology institute. Partial scholarship. Not full but enough to make the dream feel close. I held that paper like it was fragile, like hope itself could tear if I wasn't careful. I waited for the right moment to show my parents, rehearsing what I would say, how calm and respectful I would be. When I finally did, my father barely looked at it. "How much money do they want?" he asked. I told him. The number wasn't small, but it wasn't impossible either. He sighed, leaned back, and said something that still echoes in my mind. "We don't invest in daughters." The room felt suddenly too quiet. My mother stayed busy with the kitchen. My brother looked away. No one argued. No one defended me. The decision was made as if it were obvious, reasonable, final. I nodded. I always nodded. That night, I cried silently into my pillow. Not because of the money, but because of the message behind it. I wasn't a future. I was an expense with an expiration date. Loving me, supporting me, those were bad investments. By morning, the tears were gone. I took a job tutoring younger students, then another, helping in a small shop after school. I woke up before dawn and came home after dark. My grades stayed high, but my body was always tired. Hunger became familiar. Sleep became optional. Sometimes my father would ask why I looked exhausted. When I answered honestly, he told me not to overdo it. The irony was almost laughable. I paid my own fees, one installment at a time. Every receipt felt like a victory. Every step forward felt heavier, but also stronger. I learned budgeting before I learned comfort. I learned discipline before rest. There were moments when I almost quit when the weight felt unbearable. But quitting meant going back to a life already decided for me, and that was something I refused to accept. The institute wasn't glamorous. The workload was brutal. But for the first time, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, logic, systems, ideas. I belonged there in a way I never belonged at home. My family didn't attend my first day. They didn't ask about my classes. To them, nothing had changed, but everything had changed for me. They thought denying me support would stop me. What it actually did was teach me how to survive without it. And survival, I learned, is the foundation of revenge. By the time my final school results came out, I already knew what they would say before they said it. I stood near the doorway while my father read the report, his face unreadable. Top grades, distinctions, a recommendation letter attached. Any other family would have celebrated. Mine treated it like an inconvenience. You did well, he said finally, folding the paper. Now we need to think realistically. Realistically, that word again. A week later, I received an acceptance letter from a technology institute. Partial scholarship. Not full but enough to make the dream feel close. I held that paper like it was fragile, like hope itself could tear if I wasn't careful. I waited for the right moment to show my parents, rehearsing what I would say, how calm and respectful I would be. When I finally did, my father barely looked at it. How much money do they want? He asked. I told him. The number wasn't small, but it wasn't impossible either. He sighed, leaned back, and said something that still echoes in my mind. We don't invest in daughters. The room felt suddenly too quiet. My mother stayed busy with the kitchen. My brother looked away. No one argued. No one defended me. The decision was made as if it were obvious, reasonable, final. I nodded. I always nodded. That night, I cried silently into my pillow. Not because of the money, but because of the message behind it. I wasn't a future. I was an expense with an expiration date. Loving me, supporting me, those were bad investments. By morning, the tears were gone. I took a job tutoring younger students, then another, helping in a small shop after school. I woke up before dawn and came home after dark. My grades stayed high, but my body was always tired. Hunger became familiar. Sleep became optional. Sometimes my father would ask why I looked exhausted. When I answered honestly, he told me not to overdo it. The irony was almost laughable. I paid my own fees, one installment at a time. Every receipt felt like a victory. Every step forward felt heavier, but also stronger. I learned budgeting before I learned comfort. I learned discipline before rest. There were moments when I almost quit when the weight felt unbearable. But quitting meant going back to a life already decided for me. And that was something I refused to accept. The institute wasn't glamorous. The workload was brutal. But for the first time, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, logic, systems, ideas. I belonged there in a way I never belonged at home. My family didn't attend my first day. They didn't ask about my classes. To them, nothing had changed. But everything had changed for me. They thought denying me support would stop me. What it actually did was teach me how to survive without it. And survival, I learned, is the foundation of revenge. After my first failure, I stopped seeing the world the way I used to. I no longer believed that hard work alone would protect me. And I no longer trusted that talent would be recognized automatically. Reality was harsher than that. It rewarded strategy, timing, and understanding systems that most people never bothered to question. So I started studying beyond my syllabus. I didn't just want to know how phones worked, I wanted to understand why some companies dominated the market while others disappeared. I spent nights researching manufacturing chains, component sourcing, distribution models, and branding psychology. While others relaxed, I analyzed. I took unpaid internships simply to observe. I watched how managers negotiated prices, how engineers balanced cost with quality, how marketing teams created desire out of ordinary features. I learned that people didn't just buy devices, they bought trust, identity, and promise. At home, nothing changed. My family still treated my education like a temporary phase. They asked when I would settle down. One evening, my brother asked me for help choosing a new phone. I explained specs, performance, durability. He nodded, impressed. Later, he bought a device that ignored all my advice because a salesman recommended it. That moment taught me something valuable. Knowledge meant nothing if people didn't respect the source. Respect had to be built. I started focusing on credibility, certifications, documented experience, results that could be measured. I also learned the importance of patience. Quick success was flashy but fragile. Real power took time. I watched startups burn out after early wins. I watched quiet companies grow steadily until they dominated entire sectors. I chose to be quiet. Inside, however, my ambition was growing sharper. I wasn't dreaming of survival anymore. I was dreaming of control. Control over my time, my income, my decisions. Control that no one could take away by questioning my gender or worth. There were days when exhaustion crept in again, when loneliness returned, when I wondered if all this effort would ever be seen. But then I remembered something crucial. This journey was never about being seen. It was about being undeniable. I made a rule for myself during that time: never react emotionally to disrespect. Emotion gave power away. Instead, I would respond with improvement, with preparation, with progress. Slowly, opportunities began to align, not dramatically, not suddenly, but steadily. People started noticing my work ethic. Mentors offered advice. Small doors opened, and I walked through them carefully. I wasn't building a business yet. I was building myself. And unlike the girl my family thought they knew, this version was learning how the world really worked, so one day, she could bend it in her favor. They still saw a quiet daughter with limited prospects. They had no idea I was memorizing the rules of the game that would eventually silence them all. There comes a moment in some lives when struggle quietly changes direction. Not dramatically, not with applause, just a subtle shift, like a door unlocking without a sound. For me, that moment arrived when I stopped chasing approval altogether. By then, I had graduated from survival mode into something sharper: intention. I no longer worked just to pay fees or eat. I worked to learn leverage. Every task I accepted had a purpose beyond money. If it taught me nothing, I walked away even if it paid more. Poverty had taught me discipline, but ambition taught me selection. I started noticing a gap in the market that others ignored. The idea wouldn't leave me alone. I began sketching concepts in my notebook: battery capacity, screen durability, repair-friendly design. I studied pricing models obsessively. I calculated how to reduce cost without killing quality. I learned which components were overpriced because of branding, not performance. This wasn't a dream anymore. It was a plan. I tested the idea quietly. I spoke to shop owners, technicians, suppliers, never revealing my full vision. I asked questions like I was curious, not ambitious. People talk more freely when they don't feel threatened. That was another lesson my invisibility had taught me. At home, the pressure increased. Relatives started suggesting marriage proposals. My father asked how long. I planned to study endlessly. My mother warned me not to become difficult. I listened without reacting. Resistance would only tighten their grip. Silence kept me free. Inside, though, something was crystal clear. I was running out of time to stay small. I prepared a detailed proposal: product concept, cost structure, market need, long-term scalability. I rewrote it dozens of times until every sentence earned its place. This document wasn't for investors yet. It was for me. Proof that my thoughts had matured into strategy. When I finally showed it to a mentor I trusted, he didn't laugh. He didn't smile either. He read every page slowly, then looked at me and said, "This is serious." That was all, but it was enough. He didn't promise funding. He didn't guarantee success. He simply connected me to someone who could evaluate the idea professionally. One meeting led to another. Most ended in rejection. Some were polite, some were dismissive. A few questioned whether I could handle such scale. I learned not to defend myself. I defended the idea. Then one day, after weeks of silence, an email arrived asking for a second meeting. My hands shook as I read it. Nothing had changed yet: no money, no company, no victory. But for the first time, the world outside my family was responding to me, not as a daughter, not as a girl, not as an obligation, but as a mind with a vision. They still thought I was wasting time. They didn't know that the ground beneath my life had already begun to shift. And once it started moving, there would be no way to stop what was coming. The second meeting changed everything quietly, almost suspiciously. There were no dramatic handshakes, no promises spoken with excitement. Just questions, hard ones, about margins, scalability, risk, and failure. I answered what I knew and admitted what I didn't. I kept working, studying, and pretending nothing was happening. At home, life went on as usual. My father still talked about settling my future. My relatives still looked at me with polite concern. No one asked about my plans anymore. They had already decided they were temporary. Then the call came. Quiet was something I understood very well. Registering the company felt unreal. Seeing my name on legal documents felt heavier than joy. It felt like responsibility. There was no celebration, no announcement. I didn't even tell my family. I couldn't afford distraction. This wasn't revenge yet. This was construction. The first challenge was manufacturing. Suppliers underestimated me immediately. Some spoke slowly, as if I couldn't understand. Others tried to inflate prices. I didn't argue. I let numbers speak. I walked away from bad deals without emotion. Slowly, respect replaced doubt, not because I demanded it, but because I earned it. Designing the first phone took months of revisions. Every feature had to justify its cost. Every gram of material mattered. I rejected trends that added price without purpose. I focused on durability, battery life, and repairability. A phone people could depend on. Cash was tight. Stress was constant. I slept in my office some nights, surrounded by samples and spreadsheets. There were moments I wondered if I had taken on something too big, but then I remembered what too small felt like. The first production run was terrifying. If these units failed, there would be no second chance. When the phones finally arrived, boxed and labeled, I held one in my hands and felt a strange calm. Not pride. Certainty. This worked. Distribution was modest. Local markets, online listings, no aggressive marketing, just honest messaging. And something unexpected happened. People talked. They recommended the phone to others. Repairs were rare. Feedback was strong. Orders increased, then doubled, then tripled. I reinvested everything. No luxury, no comfort. Growth demanded sacrifice, and I was already familiar with that language. One evening, my brother casually mentioned a new budget phone. Everyone is talking about. I nodded, uninterested. He showed me a review video without realizing what it was. I watched quietly as the reviewer praised the very features I had fought for. At home, no one connected the dots. They saw me coming and going, tired but composed. They assumed I was busy with work. They didn't know that behind that word was a company slowly carving its place into the market. I didn't correct them. I wasn't ready. Success doesn't need an announcement. It needs momentum. And mine had finally begun. Success didn't arrive like a celebration. It arrived like pressure. As orders increased, so did problems. Delays, logistics issues, customer service complaints, supplier negotiations. Every win came with a new weight. I stopped counting hours. Days blurred together. My phone never stopped vibrating. And for the first time in my life, it wasn't something I was denied, it was something I depended on. The company grew faster than I expected. What began as a cautious pilot turned into a growing demand. Retailers reached out. Distributors asked questions. Online reviews stacked up, most of them praising reliability and battery life. People didn't talk about luxury, they talked about trust. That was exactly what I had aimed for. I expanded the team slowly. No rushed hires. No emotional decisions. Everyone had to earn their place, just like I had. The culture I built was quiet, focused, and disciplined. No one cared where you came from, only what you contributed. At home, the shift was subtle but noticeable. My father started asking why I was always busy. My mother complained that I was never available. Relatives whispered about how serious I had become. No one suspected success. They assumed struggle. In their minds, a girl being busy could only mean she was overworking herself for little return. I let them believe that. Then one evening, everything changed. My father came home excited about a business conversation he'd overheard at a gathering. He talked about a new phone company disrupting the budget market, about strong sales, about smart leadership. He spoke with admiration, not knowing he was describing my work. I listened quietly, my heart steady. He said, "Whoever owns that company is very clever." I didn't respond. Weeks later, an interview request came from a business platform. I refused. Exposure wasn't my priority yet. Growth was. But visibility has a way of finding you when results speak loud enough. A regional newspaper ran a small article, just a paragraph, but it mentioned the founder. My name. The day my father read it, I wasn't in the room. I heard my mother call me from the kitchen, her voice uncertain. She held the paper like it was fragile. "Is this you?" Silence filled the space in a way I had never experienced before. Not dismissive silence, not ignoring silence, a stunned, recalibrating silence. My father sat down slowly. He read the article again, then again. The same man who once said investing in daughters was a Wace now struggled to process the return. He asked questions, careful ones, business questions, respectful ones. That was the moment I understood something powerful. They didn't see my struggle. They didn't see my discipline. They didn't see my sacrifices. They saw results. And in their world, results changed everything. I didn't feel victory. I felt distance. Because the girl they ignored didn't disappear. She just outgrew the space they had given her. And now, for the first time, they were trying to catch up. After the article came out, the atmosphere in my house changed in ways I never imagined. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't pride. It was confusion mixed with caution, like they were suddenly walking on unfamiliar ground. My father started conversations he had never initiated before. He asked how the company worked, how markets shifted, how competition was handled. He listened more than he spoke. That alone felt unreal. The man who once dismissed my dreams now took notes mentally, carefully afraid to reveal how much he didn't know. My mother began asking if I was eating properly, if I was sleeping enough. Concern that should have existed years ago arrived only after success validated my worth. It hurt, but it also taught me something important. In some families, love is unlocked by achievement. Relatives started calling, not to apologize, not to acknowledge the past, but to connect, to ask questions, to suggest collaborations, to proudly say my name where they once ignored it. Their voices carried admiration, but also calculation. I recognized it instantly. I had studied this behavior in boardrooms long before I saw it at my own dinner table. One evening, my father asked me to attend a family gathering. The invitation felt heavier than any business deal. I knew what it meant. Public acknowledgement, silent correction, a chance for them to rewrite history without ever admitting they were wrong. I agreed. At the gathering, people who once barely greeted me now introduced me to others. "This is her," they said. "She owns a phone company." Their tone was proud, as if they had always believed in me. I smiled politely. I didn't expose the truth. I didn't need to. During dinner, my father cleared his throat and spoke about hard work, perseverance, and the importance of supporting children's dreams. People nodded. Some looked at me. I understood what was happening. This was their apology, not spoken directly, not honestly, but publicly. And strangely, I didn't feel angry. I felt detached. Later that night, my father approached me alone. His voice was quieter, stripped of authority. He said, "I didn't think you could do this." It wasn't a compliment. It was a confession. I looked at him and realized something profound. My success had forced him to confront his own beliefs, not just about me but about control, gender, and limitation. "I didn't need you to think I could," I replied calmly. "I needed you not to stop me." He nodded slowly. That was the closest we would ever come to an apology. In that moment, I understood the final truth of my journey. Revenge didn't look like humiliation. It didn't sound like shouting. It looked like sitting across from the people who ignored you and realizing they no longer had power over how you saw yourself. Respect had arrived, not because they grew kinder, but because I grew undeniable. And that made all the difference. The weeks after the family gathering were strange. Outwardly, nothing had changed. My father still carried his stern posture. My mother moved silently, and my brother occasionally smirked as if testing me. Yet the atmosphere was different. Every glance, every pause in conversation, every question carried weight. For years, I had been invisible, a shadow my family ignored. Now, my achievements pressed against that invisibility, making it impossible for them to dismiss me. I didn't need confrontation. I didn't need to demand apologies or flaunt my success. I simply continued my work quietly, relentlessly, with precision. Results spoke louder than words, and my company, growing steadily in the market, was undeniable. It wasn't just a business. It was proof that the girl they overlooked had built something significant, valuable, and lasting. The first conversation with my father after the article illustrated the shift. He asked questions about production costs, supply chains, and market strategy. I answered calmly, clearly, without hesitation. The man who once told me investing in a daughter's education was a waste now had to recognize that I had learned what he refused to teach me and applied it successfully. My mother's approach changed too. Instead of nagging or reminding me of my limits, She asked for guidance. She wanted to buy one of my devices for the house and listened intently as I explained features and usage. She deferred to my knowledge, no longer assuming authority over me. The subtle recognition was real, even if she never admitted it aloud. Even my brother, the one who had once ridiculed my ambitions, began speaking to me differently. He asked questions, observed quietly, and occasionally sought guidance. The dynamic had shifted. He no longer saw me as a nuisance but as someone whose expertise mattered. I realized something important. True revenge doesn't roar. It doesn't humiliate. It doesn't need dramatic displays. True revenge is transformation. It is becoming someone so capable, so persistent, so undeniable, that those who underestimated you are forced to acknowledge you without ever admitting they were wrong. Every dismissal, every ignored achievement, every comment about girls being unworthy had become fuel. That fuel had produced results. Power, I realized, is often quiet. My father no longer questioned my ambition. My mother deferred to my advice. And even my brother learned respect without saying it aloud. I didn't gloat. I simply existed fully and undeniably. I had been invisible once. Now, I was indispensable. They had underestimated me at every turn. And that, more than wealth, more than recognition, was my ultimate revenge. Revenge is not a moment of dramatic victory. It is the unstoppable accumulation of proof that you were never the problem. My family may have ignored me once, but now, they had no choice but to witness the person I had become. And in that forced recognition lay the sweetest triumph of all. By the time I had fully established the first product line, something remarkable happened. The world outside my family began to notice. Small retailers I had initially approached cautiously now called, asking for bulk orders. Online sales increased steadily, fueled by positive reviews and word-of-mouth recommendations. People praised the durability, battery life, and reliability of my device's features. I had prioritized because I understood the struggles of ordinary users. My company was no longer a secret project. It was a recognized brand in its segment. Investors reached out, offering partnerships, expansions, and collaborations. I evaluated each one carefully, refusing to compromise my vision or the integrity of my product. I had learned long ago that control was more valuable than immediate praise or comfort. At home, the shift was impossible to ignore. My father, who had once dismissed my dreams, now listened attentively whenever I spoke about markets, production, or strategy. My mother began asking questions about devices and usage, not out of curiosity alone, but because she respected my knowledge. Even my brother, who once mocked my ambitions, now sought advice and seemed genuinely intrigued by my work. Yet I never let their recognition affect me emotionally. I had built this life without them, and their approval was irrelevant. The quiet satisfaction of knowing I had outgrown their limitations was enough. They had ignored me, underestimated me, and restricted me, but none of it had stopped me. My success was the result of years of discipline, learning, and relentless effort. The most powerful moment came when a regional business magazine ran a feature on rising entrepreneurs in technology. My company was highlighted, and my name was mentioned as the founder. My father happened to see it first. He read it twice, then called me over, quietly and carefully. For the first time, he asked detailed questions about my operations, strategy, and plans for the future. His tone had changed, curious, respectful, and cautious. I answered calmly, without bragging, letting facts and logic speak. He nodded slowly, acknowledging not only the company's success but the person behind it. That silent acknowledgement carried more weight than any words of praise. I realized then that revenge had not been loud, nor had it needed confrontation. It had been patient, calculated, and powerful in its quiet persistence. I had transformed my invisibility into influence, my struggles into strategy, and my family's doubt into respect. They had tried to define me, limit me, and ignore me. I had proven them wrong not through anger, but through undeniable results. And in that realization, I finally understood the true power of persistence, intelligence, and silent determination. The girl they dismissed had become the woman they could no longer ignore. By now, my company had grown far beyond what anyone in my family could have imagined. Orders were coming from across the country, and even small international inquiries had started. I was no longer just a quiet girl in their home. I had become a business owner with influence, credibility, and a vision that others respected. At home, the shift in dynamics was unmistakable. My father, who once dismissed my education and dreams, began to ask thoughtful questions about production schedules, market trends, and potential partnerships. He no longer gave commands about my life. Instead, he sought my advice. My mother, who had silently tolerated my ambitions, now deferred to my expertise, asking for my guidance on purchases, gadgets, and even household technology. Even my brother, who had mocked me repeatedly, began to look at me with curiosity and quiet admiration. One evening, after months of steady growth, my father called me into the living room. In his hands was the latest business magazine. My company was featured on the cover as a rising tech brand. He flipped the pages slowly, almost hesitantly, before finally looking at me. "I didn't think you could do this," he said quietly. I paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. There was no apology, no justification, only acknowledgement. I smiled softly. "I didn't need you to believe in me," I replied. "I just needed to keep moving forward." It was a simple exchange, but it marked a turning point. Their doubt, their dismissal, and their underestimation of me had fueled every late night, every sacrifice, and every challenge I overcame. And now, they had no choice but to recognize my achievements. The best part was that my revenge wasn't loud or vengeful. I didn't humiliate anyone. I didn't shout my victories. I simply built something remarkable, a life they couldn't ignore. My success spoke for itself. It was proof that the girl they ignored had transformed into a woman they could not dismiss. From then on, the way they treated me shifted permanently. My opinions were valued, my knowledge respected, my presence noticed. They had tried to define my limits, but I had rewritten the boundaries for myself. Quietly, persistently, and powerfully. I had been invisible once. Now, I was indispensable, and that realization, knowing that I had turned neglect into determination, doubt into proof, was the most satisfying triumph of all. Years of struggle, neglect, and quiet determination had finally paid off. My small phone project had grown into a recognized company. Orders came from every corner of the country. Investors who had doubted me before were now reaching out, eager to partner. Customers trusted my devices, praised their durability, and shared their experiences online. Every late night, every skipped meal, every moment of sacrifice had built not just a business, but undeniable proof of my worth. At home, the atmosphere had shifted. My father, who had once dismissed my ambitions, now asked questions about strategy, production, and expansion. He no longer gave commands or criticized me. Instead, he listened, careful and attentive. My mother, who had warned me to be realistic, now deferred to my judgment, and even sought my advice on gadgets and technology. My brother, who had once mocked my efforts, observed me with respect, occasionally asking questions and learning quietly. One evening, my father handed me a business magazine. My company was featured as a rising brand, and my name was listed as the founder. He looked at me, hesitant but sincere, and said, "I didn't think you could do this." I smiled calmly. "I didn't need you to believe in me. I only needed to believe in myself," I replied. That moment crystallized everything I had learned. Revenge was never about humiliation or confrontation. True revenge is transformation. It's becoming someone so capable, so persistent, and so undeniable that even those who doubted you are forced to acknowledge your presence. My family's recognition was quiet but unmistakable. The girl they had ignored had grown into a woman they could no longer dismiss. They witnessed my achievements, not as spectators of a lucky success but as proof of every lesson I had learned through hardship, discipline, perseverance, and resilience. I hadn't shouted or demanded attention. I had simply built a life they could not ignore. Every word they once used to limit me, "Girls like you don't need this," had fueled me. That fuel had become my strength, my independence, and ultimately, my triumph. In family gatherings, in casual conversations, in their cautious glances, I could see respect. My opinions mattered. My presence was acknowledged. And the most satisfying part, my success was quiet but undeniable, powerful but patient, earned through years of struggle rather than demanded. The girl they dismissed had become the woman they could not overlook. And in that reality, I found the ultimate revenge, living a life of achievement, respect, and self-worth that no one could take away, proving silently but completely that I had always been capable, always been strong, and always been deserving. No confrontation, no humiliation, just undeniable proof of who I was and who I had always been. The story was finished. My life, my company, my recognition, all mine.